talking about kids. For those of you who don't know, my name is Edgar. I'm the youth director here. And recently, my wife and I had a baby daughter. And she is just super precious. I love her to death. There's nothing I wouldn't do for her. But there are times, My wife and I, we want 3 kids. And probably around week 2 or 3, it's like 3 in the morning. Liana is just crying, waking us up. I'm walking around the room with her, carrying her. And I remember looking at Gina. And I'm like, are we sure we want more? Like, I'm an only child. I turned out okay. She'll be fine. And Gina's looking at me like, no, we're getting more, okay? Like, okay, all right, it's just a season, it's just a season. And one of those things that I didn't know about, I heard about it, didn't fully understand it until now, is the idea of growing pains. The idea of your child is growing, they're getting bigger, and so it's painful to grow. And I remember that when I was little. And it's one of those things where I'm holding her and she's crying, and I want to cry too, because I in a sense, I'm crying because she's crying, but I'm also crying because I want her to stop crying. And it's a very difficult time, and seeing her go through that is hard for me, but also it's been hard for me in a different way, not just in looking at her and feeling bad for her, but I'm starting to see things that I thought I was done dealing with in myself. Right? Having a baby who is crying, and at times you don't know why she's crying. You have no clue why she's crying. You're doing everything. Are you hungry? Did you use the bathroom? Do you just want to walk around? I don't know. And I'm trying to figure it out, and I can't, and I start getting annoyed. I start getting upset, and I'm starting to think to myself, man, that's still there. That's something I thought I grew out of. That's something I thought that I was done dealing with. But this newborn baby has completely brought that back out. And so today I want to talk about growing pains. It's pains that maybe you don't know you're dealing with, pains that you thought you were done with, or pains, just new seasons of new pain, whether physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, that you thought maybe you would never go through. And you're in the middle of it right now. And if that's you today, if you're going through that pain, if you're going through that struggle, if you're in this new season encountering a new form of pain or an older pain that you thought you were done with, I believe this is a word of the Lord for you today. We're going to be in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10 today. And in this passage, Paul has just seen, right before in verses 1 through 6, Paul is seeing these incredible visions where he just sees heaven. He sees someone ascend to heaven. And Paul's seeing these incredible things, these incredible revelations. And then this happens that we're about to read. See verses 7 through 10, chapter 12 of 2 Corinthians. It says, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself. Concerning this, I implored the Lord 3 times that it might leave me. And he has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Amen. That is such a contradiction to the world that we live in. Right? The world that we live in, I'll get to this later too. The world we live in, we want to show our strength so that people can see how big we are, how strong we are. I want to show you how much I know so you see how smart I am. Well, in reality, we see in the kingdom of God, it's backwards. We boast about our weaknesses because it is then that we are strong. So we see in 2 Corinthians, in verse 7, we see that Paul says, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself. And that's the first thing I want to talk about, is that Paul's pain was not without purpose. Paul's pain came with a purpose. There was a reason why that thorn was there. There was a reason why he was suffering, why he felt that pain. It wasn't just for the sake of it. It wasn't just because it was there for no reason. But the pain that Paul was feeling, no matter how immense, like he said, he came to the Lord, he prayed 3 times that it would go away. But it was there for a purpose. And we see that in that same verse. Twice Paul says, to keep me from exalting myself and to keep me from exalting myself. It was a way for Paul to remind himself, I'm seeing these great visions, these great revelations, but I am still man, I am still broken, I am still the chief of sinners, as Paul calls himself. That thorn was at his side to keep him humble. There was a purpose to that thorn, and there is a purpose for every pain in our lives. There is a reason for it there. And sometimes we'll see it, sometimes we won't. Sometimes we'll know exactly why that's there. We'll realize it. Other times, we won't. And we're left wondering. That's when we got to come to the Lord. And that's exactly what Paul does next in verse 8. He says, concerning this, I implored the Lord 3 times that it might leave me. So we see here, this is how Paul responds to that thorn, right? He responds by going into prayer. He responds by running to God. And this is something that I believe a lot of us, including myself at times, struggle with. When we find ourselves in pain, when we find ourselves going through a difficult season, our initial response can often be, I'm going to try to figure it out. I'm going to try to sort this out. Right? Or it can be, I'm going to ignore it. That one's me. I'm going to just ignore it. It's not there. Well, I grew up bottling things down. Everything was bottled down. But the issue with bottling something down and ignoring it is that later on, that bottle's going to get full. And it can come out. It'll overflow out. And at times, it overflows in anger and in rage at the people that you love the most. So when we ignore things, it's just a temporary solution with a worse effect at the end. Paul runs to prayer. And oftentimes he responds with prayer and surrender. Oftentimes, this is the last thing we think about, right? I'm gonna ignore it. Then ignoring it doesn't work. Let me try to figure it out. Figuring out doesn't work. I don't understand it. Let me try to gauge, let me talk to a few people, see, and maybe they can help me out. All right, that didn't work. All right, let me go ask God. But the thing is, we ask and we look for answers. We try to ask different people. We ask ourselves, we try to find our own answer. And we expect God to give us an answer without us running to God. We're not running to him for prayer. We're not running to him asking. We're not knocking at the door and we expect an answer. We expect an invitation, but we're not knocking and we're not calling. Matthew 7, 7 and 8, Jesus says on the Sermon on the Mount, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. But that door will never open if we're not knocking at it. Christ is not gonna force himself on you. He'll chase after you, absolutely. But when you have a relationship with him, he's not gonna force himself. In every situation, good or bad, our initial response should be to pray. Now, when I was younger, living in Puerto Rico, I was around 9 or 10 years old. And we lived for Puerto Rico, it was a decent neighborhood. It was a pretty nice neighborhood. Our house was right next to the security guard gate, which, yes, made us feel safe. And I had a friend probably 2 houses down, and he was my age. And back then, I was 8, 9 years old. We didn't have phones. We didn't have cell phones. So really, to know when we can hang out and when we can do things, there was 2 ways of doing it. One was me going over to his house and knocking on his door. But oftentimes I didn't do that because I was a shy kid and I didn't want his parents to answer and didn't have to have that communication, that conversation. I didn't want that. So I usually went with the second option, which was to stand outside of his driveway and just shout his name and just scream. And sometimes he would answer, other times his brother or his sister would tell me to stop. You never know what you would get, right? But there was one day when I'm walking up to the house and the cars aren't there. The driveway is empty. And there's no cars in the driveway, no cars in the garage. The garages there didn't have doors, so you could just see inside the garage. And I remember, there's times when he is home, because sometimes his brother or sister will stay home and he'll stay with them. But do I want to knock? I don't feel like shouting. And oftentimes what I would do is sit and wait for his parents to come home with him or whatever the case was. So I remember 8 or 9 years old, there's no one at the house, and I sit down at their doorstep and I'm waiting. Probably waited for about 30 minutes or so, and I hear a shout from their window, "Hey, you can come up." I'm like, "Oh, you're home. Okay, sorry." It's like, "Why didn't you knock?" I was like, "I don't know. I should have." And a lot of times, God is asking the same question. Why aren't you knocking? Why aren't you calling? I'm right here. And it's such a hard realization because we think that we got to have it all together to knock on the door. We think we got to have it all together to call on his name. But he says, you come as you are. I will take you in as you are, and I will transform you. I will grow you. It won't be easy. It can be hard, but the growth will come in his name. In every situation, good or bad, our initial response should be to pray. And I put good or bad because it is, I don't know where this came from. My bad. Wow. There we go. Y'all got a sneak peek at what's coming. In every situation, good or bad. Right? So these can be prayers of surrender. They can be prayers of repentance. They can be prayers of crying out to God, but they can also be prayers of praise and thanksgiving unto the Lord. In every situation, good or bad, it should be to pray. And we see that when Paul comes to God, he asks 3 times for that thorn to be taken away. And then we see Jesus' response in verse 9. And he has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Let me tell y'all, the grace of God is enough. The grace of God is more than enough, regardless of the situation, regardless of our circumstance. And you might be sitting there, you might be thinking, but Edgar, you don't know my pain. You don't know my sorrow. You don't know what I'm going through. And you're absolutely right. But let me tell you somebody who does. The same one who went to the cross to take that pain away, who endured the pain, the wrath of man and the wrath of God at the same time so that he could take that pain away from you. The grace of God is enough. I love how Paul goes from asking God to take this from him, to take away this thorn, to take away this pain, to now boasting about his weakness. It's a complete shift in what Paul initially is doing and to where he is at now. All we need is his grace, because it is in our weakness, by his grace, that we are now strong and that his power is truly shown in our lives. And if there's 6 words I want you all to take home, if you don't remember anything else from this message, if there's nothing else that you remember, I want you to remember these 6 words, this simple sentence: my grace is sufficient for you. Whenever you find yourself in a trial, my grace is sufficient for you. If you're in pain, in a season of difficulty, I want you to remember Jesus' words: my grace is sufficient for you. For power is perfected in weakness. We continue on to verse 10, and Paul says, therefore I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Like I said earlier, that is such a different view from what we normally see in the world. And we've been talking about the differences of the three kingdoms, right? The kingdom of heaven, kingdom of the world, kingdom of Satan. We've been seeing these three differences, and we see the big contrast in the kingdom of the world, kingdom of heaven right here too. Right? Kingdom of the world, it's show your strength, boast in your strength, boast in what you're good at, that others may see you, boast in what you got. Maybe some blessings will come along the way because of that, because people see how good you are, how smart you are, how great you are at this. But God is saying it's backwards. In the kingdom of heaven, it is the meek, it is the weak that are now strong. It is the meek that are lifted high. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And that is because our strength is not our own. We can be strong in our weakness because our strength is not our own. Our strength does not belong to us. Right? Our weaknesses may come from this world. Our weaknesses may come from this world, but our strength comes from the one who has overcome the world. There is no weakness on earth. There is no pain on earth. There is no damage, no difficulty, no persecution on earth that our God has not overcome. We're going to go through painful times. Right? We're going to go through difficult times, whether it's because of the brokenness of our world or whether it's because we're standing for Christ. As believers, we have that twofold. We're going to suffer in both ways. But it is in that suffering, it is in that difficulty, it is in that weakness that Christ's name is glorified the most. John 16, verse 33, Jesus says, these things I have spoken to you, so that in me you may have peace. In the world you have tribulation, but take courage. I have overcome the world. Right? And the ultimate way that we can glorify Christ in our pain and in our difficulty is when we acknowledge, I am not strong enough to carry this. I'm too weak to carry this, especially alone. When we acknowledge that we are not strong enough to carry our pain, we are able to surrender it to the one who already did. It is when he went to the cross, he endured the pain, he endured the sacrifice, he endured the all persecution, wrath of God and man at the same time, that he could take that away from us now. He died knowing the pain we would go through, the suffering we would go through, the sin that we would cause against him. And he still thought of each and every single one of you in this room and said, you are worthy of the price. You are worthy of the pain. You are worthy of the sacrifice. So when we go through difficult seasons, when we go through hard times and pain, we can surrender that at his feet, knowing that he has already endured it all. That there's no pain that I'm going through that could ever even compare to what he went through. And because of that, he is able to take it. He is able to help us and walk with us. His burden is light and his yoke is easy. His word says, so take my yoke upon you. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Now, I said earlier that how we react to pain will ultimately determine the level of our growth. And so when we talk about pain, there's ultimately three ways that we will react to pain. Now, there's ultimately usually three ways that we can react to pain. The first one, we can ignore it. Talked about that earlier, right? So let's imagine that this water bottle is filled with pain. Okay, this is pain. Imagine that this is just something that's causing me pain, right? I'm gonna hold it out, and right now, I feel it, right? I'm holding on to my pain, but I'm gonna ignore it. It's not even there. right? I'm not looking at it. I'm not paying attention to it. It's not there. It's not, I don't really care for it. But I'm starting to really feel it. The weight of it is starting to really cause some pain in my arm now. So now I'm not just suffering the pain of what this is, but now it's also affecting me. I'm feeling the pain. And I keep ignoring it, but it just gets worse and worse. It feels like it's getting heavier and heavier. The amount of pain hasn't changed, but because I'm holding on to it for so long and I'm choosing to ignore it, it's feeling heavier and heavier, causing more and more pain. The second way that we can react to it is we try to manage it. We try to manage it. So, excuse me, so I'm holding on to the bottle, right? I'm holding on to this pain. But now, instead of ignoring it, I'm going to manage it. So what can that look like? Ooh, that's nice. Thing is, right, it feels good for a moment. I'm managing it. My right arm still hurts, though. My right arm still feels the pain that this caused. And it feels nice for now. But give it a minute or two, and my left arm's going to start feeling exactly how my right arm felt. And as I'm still holding it, I can say, oh, but I'm managing it. So let me just do the same thing I did. Okay, that helps. But now my left arm still hurts a little, and my right arm, while it felt nice for a couple of seconds, now it's right back to how I was feeling when I first started. So we can manage it, but only for so long before we crumble and break down as if we were ignoring it. And the last way we can react to it is we can surrender it. When we surrender the pain and we put it down, it doesn't mean it disappears. It's still there. And I still know that it's there. But I'm saying, Jesus, I'm laying it down at your feet. I'm laying it down to you, Jesus. And I know that I can surrender this to you. And it doesn't just feel like a weight has been lifted, but now I know I'm not just walking through this alone. And like I said, my body, I still feel a little bit of the pain. It's getting better, but I still feel it. And I can still see the pain. It doesn't mean that it's going to go away immediately. But as I start surrendering and as I start growing in the Lord, you might have the memory of it, but that damage and that pain, that will slowly start to turn into growth and blessing. And you'll start seeing the purpose and the reason of why that pain was there in the beginning. We can't suffer through pain forever. So we surrender it to the one who already did. So church, how will you react to pain today? Today you have the choice. You have the choice this morning to either ignore it, keep telling yourself it's not there, keep telling yourself that it'll be okay. You can manage it. You can say, oh, but I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to sort it out. I can handle it. It's not big enough for God. Let me tell you, there is no such thing as not big enough for God. Just as how there is no such thing as too big for God. You can either ignore it, you can manage it, or you can take the time today to surrender it. George and Rita are going to lead us in a song. And if I can have our elders and even our pastoral staff come on up, and if you want prayer, if you have a pain that you need to surrender, if it is something that you've been walking through by yourself, I encourage you, don't let this time pass by. Don't let this time just go away. Take this moment and surrender at the feet of Jesus. We'll have prayer partners. You guys can come up now. We'll have prayer partners. And if you just want to kneel at the altar, that's also open to you. My grace is sufficient for you. So, Remember those words, my grace is sufficient for you. If you want prayer, come on up. If you want to kneel at the altars, they're open as well. Jesus is waiting for you. Knock on the door and it will be open to you.